The sound of ripping nylon didn't just echo through Terminal 4. It shattered a young girl's future. 1 second, 19-year-old Daisy Reynolds was holding the prototype that would pay for her college tuition. The next, a power-tripping security officer named Derek Brock was dumping her life's work onto the dirty airport tiles like it was garbage. He thought she was just another helpless passenger he could bully. He thought nobody was watching. He was wrong, because standing 20 feet away, watching her niece humiliated in public, was the one woman who could end his career with a single phone call. What happened next wasn't just justice. It was total destruction. You do not want to miss the look on his face when he realizes who she is. The air inside Chicago's O'Hare International Airport was stale, smelling faintly of floor wax and burnt coffee. For 19-year-old Daisy Reynolds, however, the air felt thin, hard to breathe. She adjusted the strap of her battered navy blue JanSport backpack, pulling it tighter against her chest. To anyone else, it looked like a carry-on stuffed with clothes. To Daisy, that bag contained the last 6 months of her life, the Cortex-4, a drone stabilization unit she had hand-soldered for the National Distinct Robotics Championship in Seattle. "Boarding pass," a voice grunted. Daisy flinched, snapping out of her thoughts. She was at the initial checkpoint before the TSA scanners. The man standing there was large, his uniform straining at the gut. His name tag, crooked and scratched, read D. Brock. He wasn't looking at her face. He was staring at her hoodie, a simple grey pullover with the logo of her community college. "Right here, sir," Daisy said, her voice trembling slightly. She held out her phone with the QR code. Officer Derek Brock didn't scan it immediately. He let her hand hover there. He took a slow sip from a styrofoam cup, his eyes scanning her up and down. He had been working this line for 10 years. He knew the type. Young, nervous, probably hiding something. In Brock's mind, everyone was guilty of something. They just hadn't been caught yet. And today, Brock was in a foul mood. His supervisor had denied his vacation request that morning, and he was looking for a punching bag. "Hood down," Brock commanded, finally lowering his coffee. Daisy immediately pulled her hood back, revealing her box braids tied neatly in a bun. "Sorry, I'm rushing to gate K-12. "You'll get to gate K-12 when I say you get to gate K-12, Brock sneered. He snatched the phone from her hand, not scanning it, just holding it. "Where are you flying?" "Seattle for a competition." "Competition?" Brock let out a dry, mocking laugh. "What kind of competition? Hip-hop dance-off?" Daisy felt the heat rise in her cheeks. Around her, the line shuffled. A businessman in a suit checked his Rolex, sighing loudly. A mother hushed a crying baby. But nobody stepped in. They never did. "Robotics, actually," Daisy said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I have a prototype in my bag. It's delicate." That was the wrong thing to say. Brock's eyes narrowed. The boredom vanished, replaced by a predatory glint. Delicate. That meant breakable. That meant he had leverage. "Is that so?" Brock finally scanned her phone. The machine beeped green, but he didn't step aside. He leaned over the podium, his breath smelling of onions. "Well, Miss Reynolds, we take delicate items very seriously here. Security threat. Electronics can be modified. Rigged. It's just circuit boards and servos, sir. I have the documentation from the university." "I don't care about your paperwork," Brock snapped. He pointed a thick finger toward the special screening lane, the one reserved for random checks, the lane where the cameras were angled poorly, the lane where passengers went to be harassed. "Lane 4. Move it." Daisy's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at the regular line, moving smoothly. "But my flight board's in 40 minutes. If I go to lane 4 Did I ask about your flight?" Brock stepped out from behind the podium, his hand resting on his belt. I said move. Unless you want me to call the LEOs, law enforcement officers, and have you escorted out of the building for non-compliance. Daisy swallowed the lump in her throat. She knew the stories. She knew that arguing would only make it worse. She gripped her backpack straps until her knuckles turned white and walked toward lane 4. As she walked away, Brock tapped his radio, whispering to his partner down the line. Incoming on 4. Got an attitude. Needs a thorough check. Watch the bag. Daisy stepped into the isolated lane. It felt colder here. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder. She was the only one in this section. Behind the glass partition, the regular travelers rushed by, oblivious to the nightmare starting to unfold just yards away. She placed her backpack on the stainless steel table. "Please be careful," she whispered to herself. She didn't know that 50 yards away, sitting in the exclusive Diamond Sky Club, a woman named Vivian Reynolds Hayes was sipping sparkling water and reviewing a quarterly earnings report for Stratosphere Airlines. Vivian checked her watch. She had text-messaged her niece 10 minutes ago and hadn't heard back. Vivian frowned, tapping her manicured nails on the mahogany table. She should be through security by now, she murmured. Back in lane 4, Derek Brock had left his podium. He decided he wanted to handle this search personally. He walked up behind the young agent stationed there, a rookie named Sarah who looked terrified of him. "I got this one, rookie," Brock grunted, shoving Sarah aside. He stood in front of Daisy, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He pulled on a pair of blue latex gloves, snapping the wristbands loudly. "All right, Miss Robotics," Brock said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let's see what you're trying to smuggle onto my plane." Daisy watched the blue gloves. They looked clinical, but the way Brock flexed his fingers made them look like weapons. "Sir, before you open it," Daisy pleaded, her hands clasped in front of her. "The stabilization unit is in the main compartment. It's wrapped in anti-static bubble wrap. If you could just lift it out by the handle—" "Step back," Brock barked, his voice echoing off the plexiglass walls. "Do not instruct me on how to do my job. You are interfering with a federal screening process. One more word, and you're in handcuffs. Am I clear?" Daisy took a step back, her heels hitting the yellow line on the floor. "Yes." "Clear." Brock didn't unzip the bag gently. He grabbed the zipper tab and yanked it with such force that the fabric bunched and snagged. He grunted, forcing it past the snag, tearing a small hole in the lining near the top. Daisy flinched but stayed silent. "It's just the lining," she told herself. "The project is safe inside the padding." Brock reached in. He bypassed the clothes. He bypassed the toiletries bag. He went straight for the large, bubble-wrapped object at the bottom. He didn't lift it by the handle Daisy had mentioned. Instead, he dug his fingers into the side, clawing at the bubble wrap until it ripped. "What is this junk?" Brock muttered. He pulled the device out. The Cortex-4 was a beauty of engineering, a spider-like drone chassis made of 3D printed carbon fiber and exposed wiring. To a layman, it looked like a bomb or a mess of wires. To Brock, it looked like an excuse. "We got exposed wiring here," Brock announced loudly, looking around to see if anyone was watching his performance. "Non-compliant electronics." "It's a prototype," Daisy cried out, unable to stop herself. "It's battery-operated. The battery is removed. It's harmless." "I told you to shut up." Brock lifted the drone high above his head, turning it over. He shook it. Hard. Daisy gasped. "Please don't shake it. The gyroscope is calibrated." "Calibrated?" Brock sneered. "It looks like trash. And you know what we do with trash that poses a security risk?" He looked Daisy dead in the eye. This was the moment. The power trip. He wanted to see her break. He wanted to see the smart college girl cry. Brock didn't just set the drone down. He didn't even drop it. He tossed it. He threw the Cortex-4 toward the metal bin at the end of the table. But he missed. The drone hit the edge of the steel table with a sickening crack, bounced off, and clattered onto the hard terrazzo floor. Plastic shattered. A piece of the carbon fiber arm snapped off and skittered across the floor, stopping at Daisy's feet. Time seemed to freeze. The hum of the airport faded into a high-pitched ringing in Daisy's ears. She stared at the broken arm at her feet. 6 months of late nights, the scholarship money she needed to stay in school, the promise she made to her mum before she passed away that she would make something of herself. It was all lying in pieces on the dirty floor. "Oops," Brock said, showing zero emotion. He peeled off his gloves. Slippery. Daisy fell to her knees, reaching for the pieces. Her hands were shaking so bad she couldn't pick them up. Tears, hot and stinging, blurred her vision. You broke it. You broke it on purpose." "It was a security hazard," Brock said, crossing his arms. He looked satisfied, and frankly, looking at it, it was falling apart anyway. "You should thank me. Saved you the embarrassment of losing that little contest of yours." "That was my scholarship," Daisy sobbed, her voice cracking. "That was my life." "Check your tone," Brock yelled, stepping closer, towering over the girl on the floor. "You want to go to jail today? Pick up your trash and get out of my terminal. You're not flying today. I'm flagging you as a disturbance." "No, please." Daisy looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I have to get to Seattle. The competition is tomorrow." "Not on my watch," Brock said. He reached for his radio. "Control, this is Brock at checkpoint B. I have a disruptive passenger, requesting immediate removal. Code red." A code red. That meant banning her from the flight, maybe even a temporary ban from the airline. Daisy felt her world collapsing. She was going to miss the competition. She was going to lose the scholarship. She would have to drop out. Brock had won. He stood there, smirking, his chest puffed out, watching a 19-year-old girl cry over broken plastic. He thought he was the king of the castle. But he didn't notice the hush that had fallen over the people standing near the entrance of the Diamond Sky Club, about 50 feet away. He didn't notice the click-clack of expensive Italian heels moving rapidly across the floor. He didn't notice the woman in the charcoal power suit, her eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, moving with the speed and ferocity of a heat-seeking missile. Vivian Reynolds Hayes had decided to come down to the concourse to find her niece. She had exited the lounge just in time to hear the crash. She had seen the toss, and she had heard the words, "Code Red." Vivian didn't run. Executives don't run. They advance. She walked past the velvet rope, ignoring the TSA agent who tried to stop her. "Ma'am, you can't go in there," the agent said. Vivian didn't even turn her head. "Get out of my way." The authority in her voice was so absolute that the agent actually took a step back. Vivian marched straight toward lane 4. She took off her sunglasses, revealing eyes that were sharp, cold, and currently burning with a rage that could melt steel. She saw Daisy on the floor. She saw the broken drone, and she saw the name tag, D. Brock. Brock heard the footsteps. He turned around, expecting to see the police he had called. Instead, he saw a tall, elegant black woman with a haircut that cost more than his car, staring at him like he was a stain on her shoe. "Well, look at this," Brock laughed, thinking she was just another passenger interfering. "The circus is in town. Back up, lady. This is a secure area. Unless you want to join her on the no-fly list." Vivian stopped 3 feet from him. She didn't look at Daisy yet. She kept her eyes locked on Brock. The silence that stretched between them was heavy, electric. "Officer Brock," Vivian said. Her voice wasn't loud, it was terrifyingly calm. It was the voice used in boardrooms right before a CEO is fired. I suggest you take a very good look at the badge I am about to show you. And then I suggest you start praying." Brock scoffed. "Badge? You think you're special? Who are you, her lawyer?" Vivian reached into her blazer pocket. She didn't pull out a wallet. She pulled out a lanyard, encased in heavy plastic, with a gold holographic chip and a red stripe that ran diagonally across it. The highest clearance level in the aviation industry. She held it up. "I am Vivian Reynolds Hayes," she said, enunciating every syllable. "Senior Vice President of Global Operations for Stratosphere Airlines, and the chairwoman of the Passenger Oversight Committee for this airport." Brock's smirk faltered. He squinted at the ID. He saw the title. He saw the clearance code, Alpha 1. "And that," Vivian pointed to the sobbing girl on the floor, "is my niece." The color drained from Derek Brock's face so fast, it looked like his blood had evaporated. "Now," Vivian stepped closer, invading his personal space. "Pick up that bag." The silence that descended on lane 4 was heavy, physical. It was the kind of silence that happens after a gunshot, where the air itself seems to be vibrating with the echo of violence. Derek Brock stared at the badge, hovering inches from his face. The laminate was thick, the hologram of the Stratosphere Airlines logo shifting from gold to blue under the harsh fluorescent lights. But it was the red stripe, the Alpha 1 designation, that made his stomach turn to water. In the hierarchy of airport logistics, security officers were the gatekeepers, but people like Vivian Reynolds Hayes were the architects. She didn't just work at the airport. In a corporate sense, she owned the very air he breathed. He blinked, his brain misfiring, trying to reconcile the weeping college girl in the hoodie with the titan of industry standing before him in a $3,000 suit. I didn't know," Brock stammered. His voice, previously a booming weapon of intimidation, had withered into a dry, raspy squeak. He tried to take a step back, to put distance between himself and the predator he had awakened. "Stay!" Vivian commanded. She didn't shout. She didn't have to. The word hit him like a physical blow. "Put your heels on the yellow line, Officer Brock. Do not move." Brock froze. His boots shuffled awkwardly back to the line. He looked to his left, seeking support from his partner, the rookie Sarah. But Sarah was gone. She had retreated to the far end of the scanning belt, distancing herself from the blast radius. He was alone. Vivian lowered her badge slowly, tucking it back into her blazer with a deliberate, smooth motion. She took a breath, composing herself, then turned her eyes to the floor. She looked at the scattered debris of the Cortex stuff. The carbon fiber shards glinted like black ice. The wires sprawled out like the guts of a small animal. Then she looked at Daisy. Daisy was still on her knees, her hands hovering over the wreckage, paralyzed by grief. She looked up at her aunt, her eyes red and swollen. "Auntie Viv," Daisy whispered, her voice trembling. He just threw it. I told him it was delicate." Vivian's expression softened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of pure heartbreak, before hardening back into diamond-hard resolve. She reached down, placing a gentle hand on Daisy's shoulder. "Stand up, Daisy," Vivian said softly. "But the pieces, leave them," Vivian said. Her eyes snapped back to Brock. "We aren't picking that up. He is." Brock bristled. The shock was wearing off, replaced by the defensive instinct of a man who had never been held accountable in his life. He puffed his chest out, trying to reclaim a scrap of his authority. "Now wait a minute, Ms. Hayes," Brock said, forcing a chuckle that sounded like grinding gears. "Let's not get carried away. I respect your title, I do. But I am a federal security officer. I have jurisdiction here. Your niece. She was non-compliant. She was acting erratic. I have discretion to examine any item that looks suspicious. That bag was a mess of wires. It looked like an IED. Vivian tilted her head, studying him like a scientist studying a bacteria sample. An IED? She repeated. So, in your expert opinion, Officer Brock, the protocol for handling a suspected improvised explosive device is to pick it up, shake it, and throw it across the room? Brock's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Because, Vivian continued, stepping closer, her heels clicking rhythmically on the terrazzo, I sit on the safety board. I wrote the amendment to Section 14 regarding delicate electronics screening. Paragraph 4, subsection B clearly states that delicate prototypes are to be hand-swabbed for explosives residue while the passenger observes. At no point does the manual suggest hurling the object. It slipped, Brock lied. It was a weak, pathetic lie, and he knew it the moment it left his lips. It was slippery. I wore gloves. It slipped, Vivian echoed flatly. She looked around. A crowd had gathered. Passengers from the regular lines had stopped moving. Dozens of eyes were watching. And more importantly, phones were up. The red recording lights were blinking. Vivian turned to the crowd, then back to Brock. She smiled, but it was a smile devoid of warmth. It was the smile of a shark sensing blood in the water. You know, Officer Brock, the beautiful thing about Terminal 4 is that we recently upgraded the surveillance system. 4K resolution, 60 frames per second, audio enabled. She pointed a manicured finger toward a black dome on the ceiling directly above them. That camera right there, it captures everything. It captures grip strength. It captures trajectory. It captures intent. Brock looked up at the camera. He felt the sweat break free from his hairline, rolling down his neck, soaking into his collar. He knew exactly what that footage would show. It would show malice. It would show him enjoying it. I want to see a supervisor, Brock blurted out. I'm not doing this with you. I follow the chain of command, your airline corporate. You're not TSA. Oh, I've already texted Director Miller, Vivian said, checking her gold watch. He's on the 3rd floor. He should be here in 30 seconds. Brock's knees nearly buckled. Director Miller wasn't just a supervisor. He was the Federal Security Director for the entire airport. Brock had seen him once, at a Christmas party, from a distance. Daisy, Vivian said, never taking her eyes off Brock. How much was the scholarship worth? Daisy wiped her nose with her sleeve, standing up slowly. She felt small next to her aunt's towering presence. Full tuition, plus a stipend. It's about $120,000 over 4 years. Vivian nodded slowly. And the cost of the prototype? 3,000 in parts, Daisy sniffled. But hundreds of hours. I can't rebuild it, Auntie. The competition is tomorrow. Even if I glue it, the balance is gone. It won't fly. $123,000, Vivian calculated aloud. She looked at Brock. Officer Brock, on your salary, how many lifetimes do you think it will take to pay that back? I have immunity, Brock shouted, his voice cracking. Panic was setting in now. Qualified immunity. I was doing my job. Immunity protects you from mistakes, Vivian hissed, leaning in so close that Brock could smell her expensive perfume, a scent that smelled like money and power. It doesn't protect you from gross negligence and willful destruction of property, and it certainly doesn't protect you when the victim is the niece of the woman who negotiates the airport's union contracts. Brock looked at the shattered drone on the floor. He looked at Daisy, who was no longer just a hood rat in his eyes, but a walking lawsuit. He looked at the phones recording him. For the first time in 10 years, Derek Brock felt small. Pick it up, Vivian said again. Her voice was low, dangerous. What? The trash you made, Vivian said. Pick it up, every piece. If you leave a single screw on this floor, I will make sure your pension is seized before the end of the fiscal quarter." Brock hesitated. His pride was screaming at him to refuse, to call for backup, but his survival instinct was screaming louder. He looked at the rookie, Sarah, who looked away. He looked at the passengers, who were muttering in disgust. Slowly, agonizingly, Derek Brock bent his knees. His joints popped. He lowered his large frame to the floor. He reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the snapped carbon fiber arm. He was on his knees at the feet of the girl he had bullied. "Careful," Vivian said, her voice dripping with ice. "It's delicate." The humiliation of Officer Brock was interrupted by the sound of rapid footsteps approaching from the main concourse. It wasn't just one person, it was a phalanx. Leading the pack was a man in a poorly fitted grey suit, his face flushed red from running. He held a walkie-talkie in one hand and was adjusting his tie with the other. This was Supervisor Gary Henderson, the immediate floor manager. Flanking him were 2 airport police officers, their hands resting cautiously near their belts. Henderson saw the scene, and his eyes widened. He saw his senior officer, Brock, on his hands and knees picking up plastic shards. He saw a young black girl crying, and he saw Vivian Reynolds Hayes standing like a monolith in the center of the chaos. Henderson knew Vivian. Everyone in management knew Vivian. She was the woman you called when you needed a flight held for a senator. She was also the woman who could freeze a budget with a single email. "Ms. Reynolds Hayes," Henderson gasped, skidding to a halt. He tried to smile, but it looked like a grimace of pain. We got a call about a code red, a disturbance in lane 4. "There is a disturbance, Gary," Vivian said, turning her sunglasses in her hands. "But it isn't the passenger." Henderson looked down at Brock. "Brock? What the hell are you doing on the floor?" Brock scrambled up, clutching the broken drone parts to his chest like a hoard of treasure. He saw Henderson as a lifeline, a way out. "Supervisor!" Brock yelled, pointing a shaking finger at Daisy. She escalated the situation. She refused to follow screening protocols. I had to perform a manual inspection, and the object disassembled during the search. She started screaming, causing a panic. I was just securing the area. He was pivoting. He was trying to rewrite the narrative before the ink dried. "Disassembled," Daisy cried out, stepping forward. The shock was turning into anger now. "You threw it. You called it trash and you threw it. Liar!" Brock spat back. "It fell. You packed it poorly." Henderson looked between them. He was a middle manager whose primary goal in life was to make problems go away so he could go back to his office and play solitaire. He looked at the broken electronics. He looked at Daisy's hoodie. Then he looked at Vivian. He made a calculation. A bad one. "Ms. Reynolds Hayes," Henderson said, lowering his voice to a confidential whisper. "Look, obviously emotions are high. We respect your position, of course. But if Officer Brock says the item was packed poorly, maybe we can just file a claim form. We can get the airline to reimburse the bag fee, expedite her through the line." He was trying to sweep it under the rug. He was trying to buy her off with a $50 voucher. Vivian stared at Henderson for a long, uncomfortable moment. The air conditioning hummed. A baby cried in the distance. "A claim form," Vivian repeated, her voice deadpan. "Yes, standard T14 form," Henderson nodded eagerly. "Accidental damage during screening. We process it in 6 to 8 weeks. Maybe getting $70-80 back?" Vivian laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. She didn't look at Henderson. She tapped the screen twice and held it to her ear. "Director Miller?" she said into the phone. Henderson's face went pale. Ms. Reynolds-Hayes, there's no need to bother the director. Yes, I'm at checkpoint B, Vivian continued, ignoring Henderson completely. I have a situation involving Officer Derek Brock and Supervisor Gary Henderson. I need you down here. And Frank, bring the airport legal counsel and the union rep. Yes, now. She hung up and looked at Henderson. 6 to 8 weeks won't work, Gary. My niece's robotics competition is in Seattle tomorrow morning. This device, she gestured to the wreckage in Brock's arms, was her entry. Officer Brock didn't just break a toy. He destroyed a unique, hand-engineered prototype that represents her entire academic future. I didn't know, Brock shouted again. How was I supposed to know? Because she told you. Vivian's voice finally rose, cracking like a whip. She told you it was delicate. She told you what it was. But you didn't hear her. You didn't hear her because you didn't see a scientist. You saw a girl in a hoodie from a zip code you don't respect, and you decided to teach her a lesson. Vivian stepped closer to Brock, her eyes blazing. You wanted to feel big, didn't you, Derek? You wanted to exert power. Well, congratulations. You have my full attention. Do you feel powerful now? Brock swallowed hard. He looked at the police officers, hoping they would intervene. But the officers were staring at the ceiling, at the floor, anywhere but at him. They knew the score. They weren't going down with him. This lane is closed, Vivian announced, turning to the line of passengers behind the glass. Everyone move to lane 5. Lane 4 is now a crime scene. You can't close a federal lane, Henderson squeaked. Watch me, Vivian said. She walked over to the conveyor belt control panel and slammed her hand down on the emergency stop button. The belt ground to a halt with a loud screech. The red lights above the lane began to flash. Alarms blared for a second before cutting off. The stillness that followed was absolute. Daisy walked over to Vivian. Her adrenaline was fading, replaced by a deep, aching exhaustion. She looked at the pieces in Brock's hands, the servo motors, the snapped rotors. Auntie, Daisy whispered, tears welling up again. It's over. Even if you get him fired. I can't compete. I can't show up with a bag of junk. I'm going to lose the scholarship. Vivian turned to her niece. The mask of the iron executive slipped away entirely. She pulled Daisy into a hug, wrapping her arms tight around the girl's trembling shoulders. She didn't care about the silk suit. She didn't care about the onlookers. Listen to me, Vivian whispered into Daisy's hair. You are a Reynolds. We do not quit. We do not fold. But the drone is destroyed. The prototype is destroyed, Vivian corrected her. She pulled back, holding Daisy's face in her hands. But the engineer is standing right here. You have the schematics? Daisy nodded, sniffing. On my laptop, in the cloud. And the code? Yes. Vivian turned her head, looking past the security checkpoint, past the terrified Supervisor Henderson, and out toward the massive glass windows where the tails of giant Boeing 777s were visible against the skyline. I have a fabrication lab in the Stratosphere hangar in Seattle, Vivian said, her mind racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. It's where we 3D print replacement cabin parts. We have industrial-grade carbon fiber printers. We have soldering stations. We have engineers. Daisy's eyes widened. But that's in Seattle. The flight takes 4 hours. The competition registration closes at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Vivian looked at her watch. Then she looked at Henderson. Then she looked at Brock, who was still holding the trash, sweating profusely. Supervisor Henderson, Vivian said coolly. Yes, ma'am? I am commandeering the airport golf cart to take my niece to the tarmac. We are bypassing the commercial terminal. The tarmac? Henderson blinked. But for which flight? Not a commercial flight, Vivian said. My corporate jet is in the hangar. I was saving it for a board meeting in Tokyo next week, but I think this is more important." She turned back to Daisy, a fierce grin spreading across her face. "We are going to fly to Seattle. You are going to use the Wi-Fi on the jet to prep your files. When we land, I will open the hangar. We will have a team of my best aerospace mechanics waiting for you. We are going to rebuild the Cortex-4 tonight. Better, stronger, and you are going to walk into that competition and you are going to win." Daisy stared at her aunt. Hope, fragile but bright, sparked in her chest. "But first," Vivian turned slowly back to Derek Brock, "we need to deal with the garbage." At that moment, the elevator doors at the end of the hall dinged. A tall man with grey hair and a very serious expression walked out, flanked by two men in suits carrying briefcases. Director Miller had arrived, and he did not look happy. He looked at the stopped conveyor belt. He looked at the crowd. He looked at Vivian. And then he looked at Brock. Brock dropped the drone pieces. They clattered to the floor again. "Director, I can explain!" Brock yelled. Director Miller held up a hand. "Save it, Brock. I just watched the feed on my way down." Director Frank Miller was a man who had spent 30 years in federal security. He had seen everything: drug smugglers, weapon threats, panic attacks. But as he stood in the middle of Checkpoint B, looking at the scene before him, his expression was one of profound, cold disappointment. He didn't shout. Men with real power rarely do. He walked slowly past the yellow tape that Supervisor Henderson had belatedly strung up. He stepped over the scattered debris of the drone as if it were a chalk outline at a murder scene. "Director, please," Derek Brock started, his voice high and thready. He was sweating so profusely now that dark patches were blooming under the arms of his uniform shirt. "You have to understand the context. The passenger was—" "Quiet," Miller said. The word was soft, but it snapped Brock's mouth shut instantly. Miller turned to Vivian. He didn't offer a handshake. The situation was too grave for pleasantries. "Ms. Reynolds-Hayes, on behalf of the administration, I apologize for the disruption." "It's not a disruption, Frank," Vivian said, crossing her arms. "It's a violation. Title 49, United States Code. Interference with air commerce by a screener. Destruction of property. And quite frankly, a hate crime disguised as a security check." The words, "hate crime," hung in the air. Brock flinched as if he'd been slapped. "Now hold on!" Brock yelled, panic overriding his training. "I ain't a racist. I checked her because she had a hoodie, because the bag looked suspicious. You can't pin that on me." Miller turned slowly to face Brock. He looked at him with the fatigue of a man who was tired of cleaning up messes made by bullies. "Officer Brock," Miller said, pulling a tablet from under his arm. "I watched the playback in the elevator. The audio is crystal clear. You called her trash. You mocked her education. You bypassed the swab test, which is mandatory for electronics, and proceeded immediately to physical agitation of the item. You threw it." "I dropped it." "You threw it," Miller corrected, tapping the screen. "Frame 402. Your arm is extended. Your wrist snaps. That is a throw. And then you smiled." Miller turned the tablet around. The image was frozen in high definition. It showed Brock, moments after the drone shattered, with a smirk on his face that radiated pure, malicious satisfaction. The crowd of passengers who were still watching from Lane 5 let out a collective murmur of disgust. Brock looked at the image of himself. He looked at the monster in the mirror. That was just nerves," Brock stammered. "No," Miller said. "That was pleasure. You enjoyed hurting this young woman." Miller took a step closer, entering Brock's personal space. "Do you know what the liability on this is, Derek? Miss Reynolds-Hayes isn't just suing for the cost of the drone. She's threatening to pull Stratosphere Airlines' contract with our private security vendor. Do you know how much that contract is worth?" Brock shook his head, mute. $400 million a year, Miller whispered. "You just jeopardized a $400 million contract because you wanted to bully a teenager." Miller held out his hand, palm up, expectant. "Badge," Miller said. Brock froze. "Director? Come on, a suspension? 2 weeks? I've got 10 years in." "I am not suspending you, Derek," Miller said, his voice hard as granite. "I am terminating you for cause, effective immediately. I am also recommending to the Federal Aviation Administration that your clearance be permanently revoked. You will never work in an airport again. You won't even work security at a mall by the time I'm done with your file." Brock's hands were shaking so bad he couldn't undo the clasp of his badge. He fumbled with it, his eyes darting around the terminal, looking for an ally. He looked at Supervisor Henderson. Henderson looked at his shoes. He looked at the rookie, Sarah. Sarah was busy helping a family load their bins, pointedly ignoring him. He was completely alone. With a final pathetic click, the badge came loose. Brock placed it in Miller's hand. It felt heavy, like lead. "And the uniform," Miller added. "You don't wear the crest anymore. Supervisor Henderson will escort you to the locker room. You have 10 minutes to change into civilian clothes and vacate the premises. If you are still in this building in 11 minutes, you will be arrested for trespassing." Miller turned his back on him. The dismissal was absolute. Brock stood there for a second, stripped of his power, stripped of his dignity. He looked at Daisy, who was standing next to her aunt. He wanted to say something, an apology, a curse, anything to assert that he still existed. But the look in Vivian's eyes stopped him cold. It was a look of total victory. Shoulders slumped, Derek Brock turned and walked away. The sound of his heavy boots scuffing the floor was the only sound in the lane. He didn't walk like a king anymore. He walked like a ghost. As he disappeared around the corner toward the locker rooms, a few passengers in the adjacent line actually started to clap. It wasn't a thunderous ovation, just a smattering of applause for justice served. Vivian didn't clap. She didn't smile. She just took a deep breath and turned to Miller. "Thank you, Frank. We will still be filing the civil suit for the damages, of course." "I expected nothing less," Miller nodded. "I'll have my legal team contact yours. Is there anything else?" "Yes," Vivian said, gesturing to the broken pieces on the floor. "Please have someone gather all of these shards. Bag them. Label them. I need them for the reconstruction." Miller signaled to an agent. "Do it. Carefully." Vivian turned to Daisy. The older woman's face, usually so composed, showed a crack of exhaustion. "Are you okay?" Daisy looked at the empty space where Brock had stood. I don't know. He's gone, but... Auntie, look at the time. It's 2:00 p.m. The flight to Seattle is 4 hours. That gets us there at 6:00 p.m. Pacific. The competition check-in is at 7:00 a.m. We have 12 hours to rebuild a machine that took me 6 months to make. Vivian adjusted her blazer. She grabbed the handle of her sleek, leather carry-on. "Then we better stop talking and start moving," Vivian said. "The car is waiting on the tarmac." They walked out of the security checkpoint, not through the passenger exit, but through the side door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." As the heavy steel door clicked shut behind them, the noise of the terminal, the crying babies, the announcements, the chaos, vanished instantly. They were in the quiet, sterile world of the elite, and the race against time had officially begun. The Gulfstream G650 jet, painted in the matte midnight blue of the Stratosphere Executive Fleet, sat on the tarmac like a crouched panther. The engines were already whining, heat shimmering off the exhaust. Daisy climbed the stairs, clutching a plastic evidence bag filled with the debris of her life. The cabin inside smelled of fresh leather and orchids. It was a world away from the dusty floor of Terminal 4. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Reynolds-Hayes," the flight attendant said, taking Vivian's coat. Doors closed immediately. "Heavy throttle," Vivian ordered, bypassing the champagne waiting on the side table. "We need to shave 20 minutes off the flight time. Tell the pilot I'll pay the fuel surcharge for the extra speed." "Understood, ma'am." As the jet roared down the runway and punched through the cloud layer, the cabin became a war room. Vivian didn't sit in a lounge chair. She sat at the conference table. She opened her laptop and connected to the satellite Wi-Fi. "Daisy," Vivian said, typing furiously. "I've messaged the Seattle team. My lead structural engineer, Marcus Chen, is meeting us at Hangar 9. He's the one who designed the wingtips for the new 787s. If anyone can fix carbon fiber, it's him." Daisy sat opposite her, staring at the plastic bag of parts. She dumped them onto the velvet tablecloth. It looked hopeless. The central chassis, the brain of the drone, was cracked down the middle. "It's not just the frame, Auntie," Daisy said, her voice hollow. "The PCB board has a hairline fracture. I can resolder the connections, but if the gyroscope is off by even a millimeter, the drone won't hover. It will drift. In the competition, drift is an automatic disqualification." Vivian stopped typing. She looked at her niece. She saw the fear. It wasn't the fear of failing, it was the fear of hoping. "Daisy," Vivian said softly, "do you remember why you started building this?" "Because I wanted the scholarship." "No," Vivian corrected. "That's why you finished it. Why did you start?" Daisy touched the broken wire. A memory surfaced. Because Mom used to watch the birds before she got sick. She used to sit on the porch and wonder how they could stay so still in the wind. I wanted to build something that could see what she saw." "Exactly," Vivian said. "You built it with love. Brock destroyed the plastic, but he didn't destroy the idea. The math is still in your head. The logic is in your hands. We aren't just gluing it back together, Daisy. We are evolving it." The flight felt like 5 minutes and 5 years all at once. Daisy spent the entire time coding, recalibrating the flight software to account for potential weight imbalances in the repair. Vivian spent the time coordinating logistics, ordering parts to be hot-shotted to the hangar from suppliers across Washington state. When the wheels touched down at King County International Airport in Seattle, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. The jet didn't taxi to the main terminal. It rolled straight to a massive, cavernous building marked Stratosphere Maintenance, Hangar 9. The huge hangar doors began to roll open before the jet even stopped. Inside, it looked like a cathedral of technology. Floodlights bathed the space in clinical white light. In the center of the floor, surrounded by tool chests and 3D printers the size of refrigerators, stood a small team of 3 people in blue jumpsuits. Leading them was Marcus Chen, a man with messy hair and thick glasses, holding a tablet. Daisy walked down the stairs, the cool Seattle air hitting her face. She felt like an imposter. These were aerospace engineers. She was a community college student. "So this is the patient?" Marcus asked, walking up to them. He didn't look at Vivian. He looked straight at the bag in Daisy's hand. He was an engineer. He cared about the machine, not the money. "Hi," Daisy squeaked. "It's a quad-rotor stabilization unit, variable pitch." Marcus took the bag. He pulled out the shattered chassis. He whistled low. "Nasty. Blunt force trauma. Who did this? A gorilla?" "A security guard," Vivian said, stepping off the jet. "Marcus, we have until 7 a.m. Can we print a new chassis?" Marcus frowned, turning the piece over in his hands. Standard carbon fiber print takes 12 hours to cure. We don't have 12 hours. Daisy's heart sank. So it's impossible? I didn't say impossible, Marcus grinned. I said we can't do a standard print. We'll have to use the rapid sintering laser. It's experimental. We use it for emergency fuselage patches. It's risky. If it gets too hot, the frame warps. If it's too cold, it's brittle. Do it, Daisy said, surprising herself with the firmness of her voice. They moved to the workbench. The next 8 hours were a blur of noise, smell, and intense focus. The hangar smelled of ozone and melting plastic. The laser printer hummed with a menacing sound. Daisy sat at a soldering station, a magnifying glass pulled over her eyes, her hands steady as a surgeon's. She was repairing the PCB board, bridging the microscopic cracks with silver wire. At 2:00 a.m., disaster struck. "Heat spike!" Marcus yelled from the printer station. Daisy looked up. The chamber of the 3D printer was glowing angry red. The new chassis inside was beginning to sag. "Abort! Abort!" the technician next to him shouted, reaching for the kill switch. "No!" Daisy jumped up. "Don't stop it! If you stop, the layers won't bond. It will delaminate." "It's melting, kid," Marcus argued. "Turn on the nitrogen cooling." Daisy pointed to a tank in the corner. "Blast the chamber with liquid nitrogen. Flash freeze the outer layer while the core stays hot." Marcus looked at her like she was crazy. That's theoretically possible, but we've never done it on a piece this small. It could shatter. It's the only chance we have, Daisy pleaded. She looked at Vivian. Vivian was standing back, drinking her 5th espresso. She wasn't an engineer. She couldn't help with the math, but she could help with the risk. "Trust her, Marcus," Vivian said. "It's her design." Marcus gritted his teeth. "All right, nitrogen. Now!" The technician cranked the valve. A hiss of white gas flooded the printer chamber. The temperature reading on the screen dropped, plummeting. The red glow faded. Everyone held their breath. The printer finished its cycle. The arm retracted. Marcus put on thermal gloves and reached into the fog. He pulled out the chassis. It was black, sleek and smoking slightly. He tapped it with a wrench. Ping. It rang like a bell. Solid. "Structure is stable," Marcus cheered. The technicians high-fived. Daisy collapsed back into her chair, letting out a breath she felt like she'd been holding since Chicago. But they weren't done. 3 a.m., Vivian called out. "Assembly time." This was the hardest part, fitting the motors, the battery, and the fragile sensors into the new body. Daisy's hands were cramping. Her eyes were burning. Every screw felt like it weighed 10 pounds. By 5:30 a.m., the Cortex-4 was reassembled. It looked different now. The new chassis, rapid-cooled by nitrogen, had a strange, iridescent sheen to it, like a beetle's shell. It looked meaner. Faster. "Moment of truth," Daisy whispered. She connected the battery. The lights on the drone flickered. Red. Then yellow. "Please." Then solid green. "System ready," the computer voice chirped. Daisy grabbed the controller. She pushed the throttle up gently. The Cortex-4 lifted off the workbench. It didn't just fly. It hung in the air, perfectly motionless. No drift. No vibration. The nitrogen-hardened frame was stiffer than the original, absorbing the motor vibrations better than before. It's better," Daisy whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "It's actually better." Vivian walked over. She looked immaculate, despite having been awake for 24 hours. She put a hand on Daisy's shoulder. "You took a pile of trash and turned it into a masterpiece," Vivian said. "That is what Reynolds women do. We rebuild." "We have to go," Marcus said, looking at the clock. "Traffic into downtown Seattle is starting. You have 45 minutes to get to the convention center." Daisy powered down the drone. She packed it into a new, hard-shell aluminum case that Marcus had found for her, one that no security guard could ever crush. "Thank you," Daisy said to the team. I don't know how to thank you." "Win," Marcus said, wiping grease from his forehead. "Just go win." Vivian grabbed her keys. "I'm driving, and I don't drive slow." As they sprinted toward the rental car waiting outside the hangar, the sun was breaking over the Cascade Mountains. It was a new day. The nightmare of Terminal 4 was behind them. The battle was ahead, and Derek Brock, wherever he was, had no idea what he had inadvertently created. He had tried to break a girl. Instead, he had forged a champion. The Seattle Convention Center was a sea of polite applause and nervous energy. The distinct hum of motors filled the air as the country's brightest young minds piloted their creations through obstacle courses. Daisy Reynolds stood at the edge of the flight deck. She looked different from the other competitors. They were well rested, wearing crisp university polos. Daisy was wearing the same grey hoodie she had worn in Chicago, now wrinkled and stained with solder flux. Her eyes were rimmed with red circles of exhaustion. "Next up," the announcer's voice boomed, "Daisy Reynolds, representing South Chicago Community College." There was a smattering of applause. The judges looked at their clipboards, then at Daisy's drone. The Cortex-4 sat on the launch pad. It didn't look like the other drones. The others were painted in bright, glossy colors. The Cortex-4, with its nitrogen-blasted chassis, was a deep, shimmering charcoal that seemed to absorb the light. It looked battle-hardened. "Miss Reynolds," the head judge, a stern professor from MIT, leaned into his microphone. "Your chassis material, it has an unusual refraction index. Is that standard carbon fiber?" Daisy took a deep breath. She looked at Vivian, who was standing in the front row, holding her breath. "No, sir," Daisy said, her voice steady. "It is a cryo-sintered carbon variant. It was rapid-cooled with liquid nitrogen during the printing process to increase tensile rigidity." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Risky? Why did you choose that method?" Daisy thought of Brock. She thought of the floor of Terminal 4. She thought of the pieces of her life scattered like trash. "Because," Daisy said, "sometimes you have to go through extreme pressure to become unbreakable." The judge nodded slowly. "Proceed with the flight demonstration." Daisy engaged the rotors. The Cortex-4 shot into the air. Usually there is a wobble, a slight drift, but the drone was locked in space. The nitrogen treatment had made the frame so stiff that there was zero resonance. It moved like a phantom. Daisy guided it through the hoops, then the slalom, and finally the precision landing. She cut the engines. The drone landed exactly on the center crosshair. For a second, there was silence. Then, the MIT professor stood up and started clapping. The rest of the hall followed. It wasn't polite applause this time. It was genuine respect. When the scores came up on the giant LED screen, Daisy didn't look. She just squeezed her eyes shut. Reynolds M. Score 9,800 rank, worst. The room erupted. Daisy felt her knees give out, but Vivian was there, hopping over the barrier to catch her. They held each other in the middle of the arena. Two women who had fought an army of bureaucracy and hate in less than 24 hours, and won. But the real victory came 2 weeks later. Daisy was back in Chicago, sitting in her new dorm room. She had transferred to the University of Washington on her full scholarship. Her phone buzzed. It was a news alert forwarded by her aunt. Headline: Major security shakeup at O'Hare. Federal director fires 12 agents, announces zero-tolerance policy. Daisy clicked the link. There, halfway down the article, was a familiar name. Derek Brock, a former senior officer, has been indicted on federal charges of destruction of property and civil rights violations. Stratosphere Airlines has also filed a civil suit against Brock personally for damages totaling $150,000. Brock, who was denied a public defender due to his previous income bracket, has reportedly filed for bankruptcy. The article included a photo of Brock leaving the courthouse. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He wasn't sneering. He was looking at the ground, hiding his face from the cameras. Daisy put the phone down. She looked out her window at the birds flying over the Seattle skyline. She didn't feel happy about Brock's ruin. She didn't feel sad either. She just felt free. She picked up her soldering iron. She had a new idea for the Cortex fee, and this time nobody was going to stop her. They say that the best revenge is massive success, and Daisy Reynolds proved that to the world. Derek Brock thought he could crush her dreams just because he had a badge and a bad attitude. He thought she was powerless, but he forgot the most important rule of physics. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. He pushed her down, but he only gave her the leverage she needed to launch herself higher than he could ever reach. Daisy didn't just rebuild a drone that night. She rebuilt her destiny. And thanks to her Aunt Vivian, the system that protected bullies like Brock was finally dismantled. It's a reminder to all of us. Never let anyone treat your dreams like trash, because what looks like broken pieces to them might just be the foundation of your greatest victory. If this story fired you up, please hit that like button. It helps us share these important stories with more people. And if you believe that karma always comes back around, type "unbreakable" in the comments below. I want to see how many of you are fighting for your dreams right now. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Up next, a landlord tries to evict a single mother on Christmas Eve, but he doesn't realize she's the one who saved his life 10 years ago. You do not want to miss that twist. Click the video on screen now. Thanks for watching.